evening, and welcome to the January 31st, 2017 Prince George County Board of Education Fiscal Year 2016 Budget Work Session. Before we begin, I'd like to always remind folks again to turn off your wireless communication devices or put them on vibrate. And then before we go, we'll ask Mrs. Berkeley to please call the roll.
Good evening. Ms. Ahmed. Dr. Anderson. Present. Mr. Blocker.
Glad to be here.
Ms. Boston. Mr. Burrows.
Here.
Ms. Eubanks. Here. Ms. Hernandez. Mr. Murray. Ms. Quinteros-Grady.
Present.
Ms. Roche.
Present.
Mr. Valentine. Mr. Wallace.
Present.
Ms. Williams. Dr. Eubanks.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, the Board of Education has convened this evening for the sole purpose to discuss the fiscal year 2018 budget. The work session this evening is the second, of 3 budget work sessions and 3 public hearings that this board is conducting to develop its budget submission for consideration by the county executive for FY 2018. Again, I will remind folks that in an effort to continue to engage our community and make this process as open and transparent and inclusive as possible, we have taken it out of the Sasser Administration Building and brought it to our school communities. Last week we were at Charles Herbert Flowers. We're here at the wonderful and beautiful Northwestern High School. Rumor has it there's some guy I know who is principal who helped to build this new building, who had something to do with its architecture and its development. I believe he's sitting here to my right over here. Great work. And we'll be at the Great Oxon Hill High School a week from today, Tuesday at 5 p.m. So the purpose of these budget work sessions is to fine-tune the budget proposal sent to us by the CEO, Dr. Kevin Maxwell, so that it meets all our highest priorities and represents the best spending plan that will serve all of our students and staff across the county. We divide, colleagues, you may remember, we kind of divide the budget into 3 sections so that we can really focus on different parts of the budget in each one of the work sessions. And so this evening's work session is going to focus on school board resources, including school-based budgeting, deputy superintendent area offices, the deputy superintendent of teaching and learning, and special education, including health, student and health services. So we want that to be our focus. Clearly, if you have other pressing issues in other parts of the budget, we will do our best to address those. And with that, I will turn this session over to Dr. Maxwell for an opening statement regarding this evening's discussion.
Thank you and good evening, Dr. Eubanks, Vice Chair Boston, members of the Board of Education. Tonight's the second of 3 board budget work sessions where you'll have an opportunity to review, analyze, and ask questions regarding the fiscal year 2018 proposed budget. I put forward a rigorous budget that addresses our most crucial needs and moves our system forward with rising academic expectations. Additional funding to support these expectations must also rise. To be that great school system, we need the support of each of you, the County Council, and our state legislative partners to fund this system at appropriate levels, commensurate with our diverse student population and their needs. I'd like to now turn it over to my Chief Financial Officer, Ray Brown, to guide our work this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Maxwell. Members of the board, Dr. Eubanks just shared the sections.
Brown, I'm sorry. Just for a minute, I'm guessing I'm not the only one who hears some background noise. Just so folks don't realize that in the control booth, we are getting some background vibrate. Continue. Sorry.
Thank you. Dr. Eubanks shared the sections of the budget we will be discussing this evening. Staff from those offices are here and available to answer your budget questions. When we reach the end of the agenda, time permitting, We'd be happy to revisit any of the sections covered here tonight. As Dr. Eubanks said earlier, Mr. Pfister, our budget director, will quickly go through the budget process. As you recall, we went over that in great detail at the first work session. Mr. Pfister?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Yeah, we are getting a little bit of feedback here. Thank you, Mr. Brown, for letting me have this opportunity to just go briefly through the budget process. As you mentioned, we did this full slide presentation last week. I'm just going to hit on some of the, the key importance on the process, and then we'll get right back into the board work session with questions. So, next slide, please. So our guiding focus, as always, is our strategic plan. Everything that we put in this budget must align to the strategic plan. So that is our guiding document throughout this entire process. Next, please. One more. One more. One more. This is our budget timeline. As you can see, it's a very rigorous timeline. We start, it's pretty much year-round, but, as was indicated here, we start in September. The arrow in your presentation is pointing to where we are tonight with the board budget work sessions, but it is a process where the CEO develops his proposed budget. This board approves their budget by March 1st, which must go to the county executive. It goes through its process with the county council, finally coming back to this board sometime in June for final approval by state category. Therefore, it must be approved by July 1 and mandated with state law. Next, please. One more. One more, please. One more. Again, our budget process starts off with input from the community. We also receive input from the Board of Education in setting their priorities. We do a rigorous review with all the department managers. Administration gets, to see some of the decisions and some of the discussions in the September to November timeframe. Decisions are generally finalized before we leave for Thanksgiving because we have time to present the budget, the CEO's proposed budget on December 15th as we did this year. Next, please. And as we are tonight in January and February, we have the budget work sessions. This board is set to approve this budget, or their budget, on February 23rd. And again, as I mentioned before, it must be sent to the county executive by March 1st. He sends his budget to county council for deliberations on March 15th. And then you will receive this budget back first part of June and then adopted by July 1. Next, please. One more. One more. And one more. And just as a reminder, the next steps, right now we are in the proposed cycle. You will prepare your requested cycle, and then finally by July 1st, we move on to the approved cycle. And that is a brief little overview of our process for this evening. We would leave the agenda up, but obviously we need to roll the screen up, so we'll end the presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Dr. Eubanks?
Thank you. For board members, and if there are any members of the public who've joined us to date, that full slideshow presentation is on board docs. If you want to make reference to it, again, we went in quite a bit more detail about that at our last budget hearing. I want to just call the board's attention to what our process has been to date when we go through a process with the CEO, that in addition to these public hearings, The board submits questions in writing several times throughout this process and gets written responses from the administration about those questions. I will remind colleagues that we got our first response to that for questions that we submitted on January 13th. We got a report on that updated on January 24th, a 93-page report that answers a significant number of questions. It was followed up with Part 2 that was submitted back to us with some questions that we answered on January 27th, a 25-page document that you should have in your files. And then Part 3, that was dated January 27th, was about 5 pages of additional information. Anyone who doesn't have access to that information, there's also, an update to Part 2. The final update to Part 2 was dated on January 30th. It's called Questions from the Board of Education Part 2. That's a 35-page document that was updated on January 30th. So all of these should be in your email. If you can't find any of them, just kind of give me a signal. I'll make sure that Erica gets them right up front so that during this process we can look at those written responses and get clarity today as we go along. So with that, I will turn it over to my board members. Of course, as I mentioned the last meeting, we don't have our fancy button system, so let me just ask folks for round one to raise your hand about who's going to start the questioning and comment process for us this evening. This could be a very short session. I like when you guys start off and then somehow we get the whole 2 hours done every time. So we got Ms. Williams.
Good evening.
Ms. Williams, anybody else want to put the queue for now? Dr. Anderson? All right. Yes, Ms. Quinteros Grady. There you go. Now we're rolling. All right. Ms. Williams.
Good evening. I don't know if the mic is working, so I'm going to talk a little bit louder.
Let's make sure it's on, and because we have to record it, so I got to make sure.
Hello?
I think that one's working. No, turn it so the light's on.
Hello?
Yep,
Okay.
That's going to get nice and close
So,
to it.
Thank you all. I always enjoy spending this time with you all during budget session. So since we're talking about school-based budget in this session, can we talk about how we formulate the formula for each of the schools to determine what they receive for school-based budget? I know that we usually do not get the actual school-based budget formula until after we're through this process. But what is your thinking about that? And can we talk about the elimination of the small school subsidy that was a part of the 2016 school year? And what are your thoughts on why that was eliminated?
Christy, would you mind?
Can you hear me? Okay. Not sure. It's not. Okay, so in addressing our formula, rather than an explicit amount, we have over 45 schools that were eligible for a small school subsidy on a base of 170 schools. So when we reapplied the formula changes that we did last year, we actually did a series of equity tests and measures, a bunch of statistics. And students who attend small schools actually receive more per student than students in non-small schools once you control for all those same demographic characteristics. So it's there, it's just in the base weight, it's built in, rather than having like an explicit call out within the model.
So when you talk about the base rate, I noticed that there was a range in that base rate. So are you saying that the small schools get the higher base rate than the other schools that who have the subsidies that are called out based on their performance? For example, you have students that are the students that have issues with education. We used to call it double basics, but now we call it those that are on that trend of not passing their grade level. So are you saying that the schools that were considered small schools before do get a subsidy, or are you saying they are not getting those additional subsidies?
So specific to the small schools, it's in the base. So they're on the higher range of the base. So keeping in mind also, we have thresholds that cap how much a school can lose year over year, for instance, just because of the number of students that are coming into them in kindergarten or in their entry grade. So we cap how much a school can lose in any one year anyway, so that we can sustain whatever academic programs they have going on already. So that's part of the reason for that range, so that one year-over-year change doesn't have a demonstrably large impact. But that's actually calculated without any of those other considerations, like the academic weights and some of those other weights that you pointed out. That's separate from the actual base.
Correct. Yep, I'm familiar that they're separate. You have the base rate that there is a range under that first line item, but then after that you have the formula. If you have students that the ninth grade retention rate or the graduation rate or something like that. So the challenge that I have in my community is that the subsidies are not, we do not receive the subsidies like some of the other schools. And when you look at the total dollar that is being provided based on school-based budget, there is a tremendous difference when you calculate the dollar per child in the school. And I'm wondering if we're doing those schools a disservice because there is a big range. In the past, it has been at least $900 per student, where there is a difference. If you calculate the total dollar given to one school, let's say of 300 students, versus another school of 300 students, because their demographics are different, there could be a $900 per child difference. So when I see this year that the subsidies, the additional dollars that are given, are based on students that are not achieving as well, and the small school subsidy has disappeared, there is a fear that there's going to be a wider spread. So I really would like for you to look at that when you're considering the school-based dollars, and maybe look to see how we're trending, maybe for the last 5 years or however long we've been doing the school-based budget, to see if there is really an equitable amount of share being given to each of the schools.
Ms. Miller, can you possibly, in addition to the formula that you eloquently just explained, that when we do classroom balancing as far as the per pupil that we average for elementary, middle, and high, and how we make sure that we make adjustments during classroom balancing too, so that there is equity among the elementary, middle, and high per pupil, no matter what type of school? Can you talk a little bit about that process as well?
Sure. So real quick, to go back to so of the $125 million that goes into the academic weights, it's not all or nothing. So it's all relative. So even our highest achieving school actually gets about $1,200 a student, and they're our highest performing school. So higher performing doesn't mean no need or no dollars. It's just all relative. So you're going to get slightly less than a school where everyone's on grade level, and they're going to get slightly less than a school where no one's on grade level. But it's all relative, and that was part of the kind of the nuance of the new model. Also, what we do through our process with IDs and all the checks and balances that we have internally while we're supporting principals with this, we look at our elementary schools around class size, we look at them around per pupil with their discretionary funds, and we do that across all of our schools, no matter what size they are, whatever range they are in terms of academic. We look at those as well, and we run a whole, again, series of equity tests and a bunch of statistics. And then also with classroom balancings and some of those set-asides, we also recognize that some of our schools are just small, and we can't always get if we have schools that have 37 kids in every single grade, we can't put 15 and 16, 15 and 16. That's not fiscally sustainable either. So we have other ways that we can make sure we're still taking care of those schools, because really no formula is going to fit the diversity in terms of the size and the complexities across 213 schools overall, and then the 177 within our weighted student formula.
So I think in a nutshell, Ms. Williams, that while classroom student-based budgeting is one layer on how we both fund and staff schools, it's not the end. So that's the first level. And then as we're going through that process, as schools determine, even with the amount of funds through the formula that are provided to them, and they feel that that's just not enough, whether it's discretionary funding and or staff, there's another process, and it's called a supplemental form, where they can say, well, in addition to what is given to us, we still need X amount of money or X amount of staff. And then that's the next process. And then there's a third layer once school starts, which is what Ms. Miller just explained, that even after we've gone through student-based budgeting, the supplemental form, then we go through that last layer of just classroom balancing and just making sure that there is equity among the per pupil expenditure, no matter if you're a small school, large school, high achieving school, Title I school, North, South, Central. We then may add additional resources to those schools as well.
And so, just really quickly, I think that is where, I guess, additional information is needed. And maybe we could see that at some point throughout the year, the total dollar given to the school based on the outcome expected. Because it's hard to, and I fully support where we need to give additional funding for schools that are in Title I communities and things like that. But we also don't want to hinder the schools. We don't want to hinder the schools that are achieving well. We want to be able to give them the additional supports that they can continue to achieve. So, and I do understand that it's not, I guess, laid out in the school-based budget dollars. And so understanding that, it helps us to better explain that to the community. Thank you.
Dr. Anderson.
Ms. Dr. Davis, for your comments. And just want to stress that, for me, the equity is moving everybody forward, but giving some students more because they need more, but not at the expense of any one group of students. My question, though, is about accountability, especially in the cases where we know, and I want to know more about where we get the funds to supplement the budgets, the school budgets for low-performing schools. Are these monies that come from Eisenhower School Improvement or Eisenhower Teacher Enhancement in addition to funds, other funds? Are they federal funds that basically support those low-performing schools or not?
I just want to make sure that I understood your question, Dr. Anderson. So you're asking for, quote unquote, the low-performing schools where we get the additional funding?
Yes.
And so I'm going to assume when you say low-performing schools, you mean those that are designated by the state. So our system right now has 2 schools that have been designated by the state as priority schools. And the state has a formula where we have to allocate additional funding, but that is through our state and federal funds through Title I. Can you give me what you mean by a
I thought that funds
low-performing
were
school?
given also to schools relative to the number of students who are low-performing in that school. For example, there might be 5 students in my class who are low-performing, and because those 5 students exist, that my school should be given more funds. And I want to know if those funds are federal funds, okay, and to what degree, if you know this, do we supplement the federal funds so that we could have a sufficient number of dollars given to schools where students are not performing up to par?
I thank you for your patience in explaining it so that I can understand the question. So thank you so much for giving it to me in a different way so that I can understand your question.
I've been a teacher.
I appreciate you, Dr. Anderson. So with the first example that you provided with low-performing students within a school, I'm going to ask Christy to walk back up because that's part of the formula. If you're below grade level, depending on the grade level, or if you're considered an at-risk student based on our early warning indicator list in the secondary school. So that's still part of the pot of money through student-based budgeting. However, I don't want to equate a low-performing school with a school of poverty. So when we're talking about federal funds, we do get federal funds based on poverty levels. But once again, I don't want to equate just because it's a school of... Just because it's a school of poverty doesn't mean that they're low performing. In addition to the Title I funds that we receive, we also receive funds for our English language learners that are both federal and state funding as well. But Ms. Miller, do you mind coming back up just to talk about the scenario?
May I ask a question?
I apologize.
Could you just give me a second, because I want to ask this to Dr. Davis.
Sure.
And it's more an accountability. Let us suppose that we're getting certain schools more money because we have a fair percentage of the students who are not performing well. What measures do we have in place to monitor the progress of these students over time? Okay, so.
I also appreciate that question because over the years in Prince George's County, sometimes we have provided additional funding to either programs or schools and assume that more money was going to equal increased student achievement. So as we go through this painstaking process, and Christy has been by, Ms. Miller, has been by my side for the past 4 years, for every school that we give additional funding for, unfortunately, what she has to do She has to also give me PARCC scores, PSAT scores, Math R scores, for me to be able to assess, is the additional funding equating to additional student achievement? And in the cases that it's not, then the rest of my team, including Dr. Golson, we have to go back to the drawing board to say, okay, just providing additional funding is not increasing student achievement. So what else do we need to do? Does that?
Yeah, that comes close. Okay. And then the second piece is the Title II money, because presumably that's to enhance teachers, and perhaps maybe more so in schools where it's necessary. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I could scream loud, but oh, this is much better. So just concerned about in these same schools, because you're looking at student performance, and you've got the Title I and you've got the Title II. And so I'm concerned about how we're determining the effectiveness of and the efficiency of placing our money. And it may not be a question to answer now, but it's one that we need to know the answer to, and we need to look at on a yearly basis to see how our students are progressing and how our teachers are progressing, you know, especially in those schools. So I do. My time is almost up, but yes, please, Ms. Miller.
So I just wanted to make maybe two clarifying points. We don't receive revenue specifically for low achieving students. The state has a really specific category of how we devolve that revenue, and so like on page 36 you can see a whole host of the different pieces of the state formula that take into account those characteristics. So low student achievement is not necessarily one of them. Also, the part of the challenge with this is the revenue cycle, the assessment cycle are very different. So for instance, right now we're working on the FY-18 budget, and that was predicated on students that were enrolled September 30th of last year. So it's always a year behind, and assessments are given in the March, April, May timeframe. So just because we put a budget in place and it's effective when schools, when students arrive, they're then being assessed in March or April. Mm-hmm. So in the interest of acknowledging the amazing amount of work that goes into launching some of these programs and launching these initiatives, you're not necessarily going to see the immediacy of like 6 months for some of them, but I think that's part of the last 3 or 4 years of the stability that we've had in knowing what we're focusing on and continuing to focus on it over time, so that we even have the opportunity to track those initiatives. And of course, at the same time, we have a whole new set of assessments, right? So we have brand new PARCC assessments and brand new KRAs and all these other things also, which also kind of makes it a little bit more difficult to measure, 3 different things that are all changing at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I know that we're all eager to see improvement in performance, but I think we all realize that it takes time for that. What I'm interested in is the plan for the time. That you say, okay, we are imposing this initiative. We expect that over a 3-year period, we're going to see this kind of progress in this kind of school or with these kinds of students. And so that's what I would like to see, just the plan. The other piece, I have a part of my theme, and I think you know my theme, but I'm concerned with how you define limited English proficiency, the LEP students. How do you define that?
So we use the WIDA test that's administered.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
It's called the WIDA test. It's a nationally recognized, probably internationally even, that assess, question 1 is what language is spoken at home, and then it goes through a whole host of different skills.
Is that test generally given to immigrant students? Or?
So question 1 is what language is spoken at home.
Is that given to all students? No. So which
the answer
population of
is-
students is the test given to?
Right, it would be in order to identify a student that is limited English proficiency. And
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. It's an assessment to identify whether or not a student is limited English, has
What
limited
student?
English
Is
proficiency.
it given to all students? So there is a
100.
subpopulation of the student body that takes this test?
That is
And what
correct.
is that population?
Students that their English language is not their
Their
first language.
Okay, and that's all I wanted to get, because then that helps me with our definition of limited English proficient. In my mind, we have some students whose first language is, quote, English, but we all know that they are deficient in English. And so I am concerned about just what does this federal program, how liberal or how flexible is the federal program relative to LEP students? Does it define an LEP student as a student whose first language is not, quote, English?
Right, in the LEP student group that is defined, that is not a Prince George's County definition.
I'm
That
asking
is-
federal, yeah.
Right, that's a both student group at the state level and the federal level. I'm not sure if anybody is here from the English Language Learner ESOL department in order to, I'm not
Just
as
LEP,
proficient.
see, that language changed a little bit. Limited English proficient, it's different from the ESOL and the ELL. But I'll come back. These. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Good evening. We just wanted to share, absolutely, once children enter into our school district, they are identified before we ever send them to our schools as being an English language learner. And those students who are identified take our WIDA test, our access testing, which is actually taking place right now, to determine the proficiency level. That proficiency level then allows us to know, depending upon where a student falls between a 1 through a 4, on how much services should be provided at the school level. Thus, a school understanding through funding how many ESOL teachers they need to purchase to make sure that we are providing more to our students who are level 1s versus our students who are level 4s that we're working to exit out of the program.
And I think we should, and I commend us for doing it, but there are some students in our system whose first language is, quote, English, who are as deficient in English as an immigrant student. And so I have to bring this up because we cannot throw that population out. We've got to deal with them head on. And with the new language, or the language in the ESSA program, I'm wondering if this limited English proficient actually can include some of American-born children who are not proficient in the English language, who are limited in their understanding, the articulation of the English
So
language.
I totally understand your question, but as defined by the federal government, no. It is for a particular group of students as they define it.
I didn't get a chance to look it up, but I had talked with one of the lawyers, and I had suggested that they expand the definition, and I didn't get to see the degree to which that was done, and I guess at this point it won't be done. But I have some other questions, but I'll wait my turn.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Ms. Quinteros-Grady.
I just had a follow-up to what Dr. Anderson mentioned regarding when a school, you all decide can get an additional funding and you ask for PARC and SAT, to sort of approve that you're going to give additional funding. When that's done, she was mentioning progress, but are the interventions or the positions that then that school will purchase, or what they will decide to do in addition to serving whatever they decide, is that at the discretion of the principal, or is something sort of based on, we want to see this progress, so we're giving you this money, and we want it to be specific to look at increasing such?
It's at the discretion of the principal on what they ask for.
Okay.
But when they ask for it, then they didn't need to give a justification for it. That then also goes to their principal supervisor and the associate before it comes up to me. So yes, they have the discretion to say, this is our deficiency or our weakness. We feel that this intervention program or this person will be helpful, and these are the outcomes that we're looking for if we're granted the additional funding or personnel.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious, building to some of what she was asking. The other thing, I want to continue to thank you for the work that you're doing, and I know these questions are a lot, but they really help to continue to show us where we're heading and things that we're building. Very excited about the Naviance. Dr. Golson, you knew I was going to bring that up. And just wanted to, I know that I see that we are looking at 6 high schools and 6 middle schools. How are we going to create any criteria to deciding where we're going to pilot the program? As I know there's just incredible excitement. I've gotten really positive feedback about the fact that this is included in the budget.
Yes, and that initial plan, our request was to make sure that the middle schools that were selected feed into that high school. So that it will be a middle and high school feeder. So even though it says 6-6, we're looking at a middle high school feeder program. And yes, there will be an application process.
That's wonderful. My last question for now was around the middle schools. We talked, I think it was my question around the servicing, the language programs, and around how many students are we serving up to now, like giving a sense of a number. It was middle, high school that I asked, I believe, I don't remember.
Yeah, and with the clarification you gave me this evening, we'll get you that information.
Thank you. Mr. Wallace.
Sorry, Mary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is a follow-up to, I believe it's a question that I submitted for the second round of budget questions in the packet online. But it's in regards to, I believe, page 60. Just wanted to get some clarification on the locked staffing formula, particularly the tag teacher and the differing in the 3 FTEs for Mattapanai versus the 1 FTE growth in all the other elementary tag teachers.
I believe staff still, HR is still researching, budget's still researching that, but we do provide a coordinator position and a foreign language lock position to all of our tag sites.
Thank you, Dr. Golson.
Mr. Wallace, actually, because I just looked at that answer, an updated document literally was emailed to the board an hour or so ago before we started, and some of those were answered on that. I didn't say that. I didn't even realize it when I first said that, but some of that is in there.
I would check my email. I was in traffic, so I didn't want to check my email while I was driving. I thank you for that, Dr. Try to stay out of trouble. My next question, maybe it was answered in the follow-up, so I'll look for that. But next I want to go to talent development, and Dr. Davis. Just want to get a brief understanding, and maybe I didn't read it correctly. It was answered in the document that I'm reading, but just the difference between talent development, a deeper definition of difference between talent development and continuous systemic improvement.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Our Office of Continuous Systemic Improvement, which is a new office, it's only about 3 years old, is focused completely on systemic improvement. Prior to the Office of Continuous Systemic Improvement, we had a school improvement office that was staffed of about 3 individuals that was charged with assisting schools with their improvement process. We have found that 3 people cannot service, the entire school district, and then more importantly, we didn't have a process in place for central office. So thus, we birthed the Office of Continuous Systemic Improvement. And the systemic improvement process that we have adopted in Prince George's County is our data-wise process. So that particular office has several specialists that are assigned to not only the central offices, but also to schools by cluster. And they are assisting schools with going through the 8 steps of the data-wise process, which you have been introduced to at several points when we're doing our workshops, and then really digging deeply into data. They're also taking a look at what needs to be improved at that particular school based on a focus area, and they're doing the same thing for central office. On the flip side, our Office of Talent Development has basically 2 main areas. One area is really the succession planning through our teacher leadership and into our assistant principals and our principals. So our Office of Talent Development really are the mothers and fathers to all of our brand new non-tenured teachers, as well as inexperienced principals and assistant principals. In addition to that, I don't want to limit the responsibilities of Office of Talent Development, but they also are charged with really the systemic professional development of our administrators as well as our new teachers. So in a nutshell, and I know I have not done justice to the work that either office has done, but I'm going to be cognizant also of the time that you have.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. My final question for this round, Mr. Chair, is just to get a brief further understanding of the incarcerated youth program. I know that it is in the district that I represent. I know it serves a very small portion of students. It's one of the sites that I would like to visit, but I know that's going to be logistically nearly impossible. But I just want to get an understanding of the services that we give those students at that facility, as well as the staffing allocations and all that.
So the services that those students receive will be just as if they were in a regular classroom setting. So they get the content that they would experience at their regular base high school, and they, at the end of earning all of the credits necessary, they actually have a graduation ceremony that takes place at their location.
And for the cutoff age, is that 18 or 21 for those students?
21.
Thank you. I yield back.
All set. Okay, so I have myself, Mr. Blocker. Anybody else want to get in the queue? Thank you, Mr. Burrows. All right, Mary Roach. All right. For first round, yeah, for first round. Yep, gotcha. All right. All right, I got to Nora. All right, so a couple of quick questions for me. One, let's go all the way back to Ms. Williams' discussion about school-based budgeting. I always think I'm smart till you guys start talking about the school-based budgeting formula, and then I realize I'm not that smart. So from the not smart question, what I know we've tweaked the formula. So my fundamental question, this might get a little bit to where Ms. Williams was headed, is have any of the changes in formula equated to any significant decrease in any particular school's funding level in either funding or FTEs, of course, taking aside changes in enrollment. So I think the main question is, it's one thing to tweak the formula, it's another thing to say our budget is 10% lower this year than it was last year as a result of the tweaking of the formula. Do you have any evidence that changes in formula are going to lead to that for this year?
So, sir, I think where we got stuck as a district with student-based budgeting and the feeling that there was not as much money is when we gave increases to teachers, but then we did not increase student-based budgeting overall money. So it cost schools more money to buy teachers, and then we did not increase the funds. Thank you to the board. You did approve additional monies for student-based budgeting as we were increasing the teachers, but as we know, you guys just approved another raise for the teachers, so that we're going to have to look closely to see how that's going to impact what the schools can buy with the set amount of money. But that doesn't have anything to do with the formula, but with the increases that are well-deserved of our teachers.
Right, which makes perfect sense. I'm just making sure that this new formula doesn't mean that School A is going to see a 5% increase and School B is going to see a 5% decrease? Except enrollment, clearly. I mean, enrollment changes, except for enrollment changes. 2 schools otherwise even, we shouldn't see that in the new formula. Okay. All right. All right. And the other part is there's a lot of discussion and kind of misunderstanding, a lot on my part, about, we understandably put in the formula additional funds for students who we know will need additional supports in order to achieve at high standards. But I've also been told, and I got to figure out if this is true, if you have this data, is our per pupil expenditure for our students in specialty programs more or less or the same as our per pupil expenditure for students in our comprehensive schools? Because I've been told that we actually spend more per pupil on our specialty programs.
We can get you that information to break it out a little bit more succinctly than this.
That was a very good question. I could have put in writing that. I didn't, because I just thought of it.
If you would have got it in writing, we'd have an answer tonight.
All right, let's put that for the next round. All right, my final line of questioning, you guys gave us some really good information. One of my board members, I don't know who, asked a really good question about IB programs and performance in the international baccalaureate programs and how we're doing. And there's been some discussion, and even within in the performance audit that looked at IB programs. And actually this data is very promising in the sense that it's showing significant improvement over time in both the number of our high school students who become IB candidates and the percentage of them who attain an IB diploma. Promising increases, but still could be argued relatively low. And I just wonder if you guys have had thoughts or discussions about IB as a strategy compared to any other strategies, more tag programs or more specialty programs, and whether that is something that, when you look at that kind of return on investment, what you think about IB as the return on investment that we're getting.
I think we'll continue to see gains and growth in the percentage of students who are obtaining an IB diploma because of our implementation of our middle years program and our primary years. So before, we didn't have a pipeline of students who were moving from elementary, middle to high. And so we've been able to now add that in the past 2 to 3 years in our budget. So you'll begin to see those changes in terms of IB diploma attainment. At the same time, we're also looking at those high schools that do not, over time, have not had increases, to see what supports we can provide to those schools and to determine if we need to, at some point, look at closing or reducing a site and moving those funds to another site where we are seeing growth.
Thank you. And is that kind of a specific plan for that, or is that something that, I'm sorry, I'm going to...
No, we have a plan.
Okay. All right. We love to, yeah. I love to see that again, because again, I was very excited to learn about the middle schools program. And in fact, I noted our 15-16 increase probably wasn't due directly to that, because this is, I'm guessing, just due to a better focus on really making sure that we push harder, because those folks haven't been through the pipeline yet.
But I do want to give credit where credit is due. Part of that is because of Frederick Douglass, who had a middle years program, and of those 21, 8 of those 21 are from Frederick Douglass. Okay. So yes, you can.
All right. All right, thank you. Thank you. That's all I have for round one. Mr. Blocker.
Good evening, board colleagues, administration.
I'm sorry, I need you to find the mic and get it right close to you. That's fine.
Good to go? All right. Good evening, everyone, board colleagues, administration, ladies and gentlemen of the community that are out today. Before I begin, I would again just like to thank the administration for you guys' hard work and the work that you do. Of course, when we're talking about the budget, it is not something that is cut and dry, so I really appreciate that. I actually want to, before I begin and start asking my questions, I would really like to acknowledge two terrific students that we have in the audience tonight. Miss Amaya Page, who was the high school advocate for the Prince George's Regional Association of Student Governments, as well as Miss Sarah Leonard, who was also the environmental list for the county student government. I'm actually asking a question on their behalf, and this question is concerning...
Where are they? Let them
they?
stand
Yeah,
up.
please stand, you guys, if you're in the audience. There she is standing up. Thank you guys for coming out. We really appreciate it. We need to get some more students out. So my question is on their behalf, and it's concerning advanced placement. I know that earlier during the year, we, made a decision that due to funding issues, we were going to have to, unfortunately, only cover the cost of advanced placement, the cost of the test for students who were on free and reduced lunch. But, Dr. Maxwell made a decision to continue to fund advanced placement for all students, whether or not you want free and reduced lunch or not. So my question is, because I recall us, mentioning that we're going to bring this issue back up. And I just figured that since we're talking about the budget, this is a perfect time to bring that issue back up. So my question is, are we going to allocate money somewhere in the budget so that we can continue to cover the cost of advanced placement, the test for all students? Because we all know this is a program that definitely helps prepare our students to be college and/or career ready. And again, give them not only the skills, but the opportunity to take courses and the test that, if they pass, they would get possible college credit.
In this FY-18 request, there is no line item to cover the cost of advanced placement exams.
Okay. Then my second question, thank you, Dr. Gosen, for the question. What do we need to do? So I just think that, again, we've heard the benefits of continuing to cover the cost for all students in advanced placement. So what can we do to ensure that there is a line item that will make it so that we can continue to fund advanced placement, the cost of advanced placement testing for all students, again, because it's very beneficial and something that we need to keep instead of, I guess, getting rid of.
We'd have
Can I just, so what can we do is one question. How much, do you want to know, like, a number?
I mean, a number is fine as well, but whatever the number is, again, this is a program that is fundamental, and again, it helps meet our mission statement, which is to prepare our students to be college and career ready. So despite whatever the cost is, I just think that that's something that we need to fund and should be something that's at the top of our priority list.
To answer both, in order to get an amount for numbers, we'd have to make an approximation based on current enrollment, because once again, we don't really know how many students will be in advanced placement until we've completed the registration process and the school year has begun. In order to be able to cover the cost for advanced placement, we would have to eliminate an existing program that currently exists in the school system.
Okay, and then, well, thank you, Dr. Golston, for asking that question. My last question, and again, I guess we could talk more offline about it, but again, I just think, I don't, like I said, again, we'll talk about it more, I'm pretty sure we will, but I don't think that it's necessary that we need to eliminate another program in order to cover the cost of a program, again, that prepares our students to meet our mission statement, which is, again, to be college and/or career ready. I think that when we're looking at the budget and discussing it, we need to find, again, it's not easy. It's not easy, but I think that we need to really take a look at this issue a little more deeply and look at this budget and see what we can move around so that we can continue to fully fund the cost of advanced placement, so again that our students can have that opportunity to take the test. And we obviously know, for the most part, I've heard it from parents and students that if we do cut this program and we only cover the cost for certain students, then we're going to see a decrease in class sizes for advanced placement. I mean, I've done research and I realized that one of the main reasons why we covered the cost of advanced placement was because we didn't have a lot of students who were taking challenging courses, and by us not having students taking challenging courses, when they have to compete, in the college process with students in Montgomery County, Howard County, all these other counties in which, students are given that opportunity to take advanced placement, we're kind of behind. And I would just also like to add that, I understand that there are other jurisdictions that in which students have to pay themselves for the test, but something that we have to realize is that this county is different. And I mean, this county, we have almost, I want to say either 60 or 70% of our students are free or reduced lunch. So, in other counties, we don't see students who, have a high level of poverty or living below the poverty line, which is, again, why we need to continue to fund the program for all students so that we can make sure that our students at least have their foot in the door when it comes to competing against students who are already wealthy and have, funding and can take advanced placement.
I just want to add to that when we first began paying for advanced placement, we didn't have at that time a legislature who passed legislation for dual enrollment. And so we are finding that we have two competing programs, which is great, that students have options. They can do dual enrollment or they can do advanced placement, and in some cases they do both. And so we just need to be cognizant that we have students who participate in both, or sometimes one or the other, and that our pass rate in our dual enrollment at this time is approximately 80%, and our pass rate in our advanced placement is 20%. And so we're approximately, and so we're working to figure out how we can build our teacher capacity piece in advanced placement so that we can make sure that the opportunities that our existing students experience in advanced placement is the same that they get in dual enrollment.
Okay, thank you.
And just to be clear, Mr. Block, we will absolutely, as a board, have more opportunities to talk about this, and it could be a good place to start with the Budget Committee after we do the hearings on the 16th to really begin to have that discussion, and I would love to talk to you about it as well. It's a complicated issue on both sides, and so it's going to be an important conversation for us to have when we move to the next stage.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Mr. Burrows.
Just to be clear, I don't know if my mic works. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Burrows. No problem. So just to be clear, actually, let me start how I intended to start before Mr. Blocker went. I want to thank both of the deputy superintendents for your work. You really are the heartbeat and lifeblood of the leadership team from what I could see. So thank you both. I also want to thank Dr. Mason with Special Ed and Student Services for her work. As everyone here knows, Special Ed is very important to me. When she came on with Dr. Joseph, the same advocates that were cussing me out, ready to sue the school district, I walked in training and I saw them at the table working very collaboratively with her department. So I want to thank the deputies, Dr. Mason, of course, Mr. Moody, who a lot of us who are active wouldn't be here without him, and everyone else for your work in the audience, and the budget staff. Now that I said that, did I hear you correctly that you're not funding AP tests? Is that right?
That is correct. Okay. There is no line item for it.
Okay, I think that's says a lot about our values. I mean, we are, either we believe that students can achieve at high levels or we don't. And if we believe that, we will reflect that in our budget. And I understand that our pass rate is 20%. That tells me that we, like you said, need to figure out what we need to do as a school district to better prepare our students for the advanced placement courses. I think we have the money in the budget currently, and I'm okay with making cuts. I think we should cut the TV station. I think we have too many offices in the executive cabinet. And at the last meeting, Mr. Wallace, who is our fantastic liaison on the Washington Area Boards of Education, made a motion for us to get this report. I have the report with me today, and it shows that not only is our executive leadership team larger than any group in the Washington Area Boards of Education, but so is our management team, which tells me that we have money. We just have to determine what we value as a board. And if we value access to advanced placement courses, then I think we should, as a board, determine what we're willing to cut to ensure that our students continue to have the ability to take these tests. I mean, as a recent graduate, I took a few of the tests, and I would not have taken a single one if it were not paid for. Because you have application fees, you have senior fees, you have prom, you have college. I mean, there's so many other things that go into it. And I'm proud to say that we cover our AP students. This is something that we do well in this county, and I'm committed to working with the community and the media and other stakeholders to shed light on this tragic decision to eliminate funding for this. That was actually not where my line of questioning was going to go, but there's that. My line of question goes towards, and so that's board, I mean, hopefully at the retreat we can talk about this to see what we value. I know my community is going to stand with me on this, and I believe yours will too. But my question is related to class size. What is the philosophy of this administration when it relates to class size? In 2013, our class sizes for elementary school was 23, middle school 24, high school 24. This year it is, for elementary school, 29.6, middle school 25, and high school 37. And so most teachers that I talk to, most parents that I talk to, most students that I talk to believe that lower class sizes translate to better focus, which translates to higher student achievement. So what is the philosophy of this administration? The superintendent, feel free to answer any of these questions. What is the philosophy of this administration, and what's the plan to reduce class sizes, or what are we doing in this regard?
Thank you, Mr. Burrows, for that question. So with class sizes, I'm going to take you back, unfortunately, I don't know, or fortunately, back to the student-based budgeting process. So schools also have an opportunity to determine how many teachers they would like to purchase versus how many out-of-classroom teachers they would like to purchase. So that determination and that process that they do both with the staff members as well as their community guides part of the class size issue. In addition to that, what we do look at, once again, through the classroom balancing process that we talked about earlier with Ms. Miller, is that beginning the first week, I believe, of school, we begin to look at class sizes of every classroom for every school. And it's through the instructional directors, through their principals, that they'll say, hey, listen, this class is too large and we would like to either have a paraprofessional and or another teacher. What we're finding in some schools, unfortunately, where we're having some of the large class sizes, we can't fit another temporary on that site, and they don't have any additional space in that school in order to be able to reduce some of those class sizes. That's not happening everywhere, but it is happening in some situations in the schoolhouse. So what we do then is that we'll add a paraprofessional in that classroom, understanding that we cannot break down class sizes. But as far as a formula that we have to say that, 15 to 1 or 30 to 1, we do not have, I don't believe, a set formula that we're going to say that every class size, unlike pre-K and the formal Head Start, where it was dictated how many we could have in a teacher to student ratio.
And that's, I'm happy you mentioned that, which brings me back to the AP test. We lost $6.5 million in federal funds, and we had to find $5 million from God knows where to pay for early start. And we can't fund advanced placement courses. I mean, I think we're balancing poor decisions on the backs of our most successful students. And I regret that that's the case, but that is the impression that I'm receiving.
I just want to make a comment about both of those. Thank you, Mr. Burrows, for your recommendation of places where we could provide funding to support AP. But I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that dual enrollment doesn't cost a fee to families, just like AP So even though legislation says that the school district has to pay for the course, those students still have to pay for their textbooks and materials, which many times, in most cases, because I'm a parent of a child who did dual enrollment, is far greater than the amount for an advanced placement exam. So I do understand the timing and the piece for senior fees and everything else that comes into play. I just don't want anyone to walk away thinking that AP you would have to pay a fee and dual enrollment you don't. In both situations, parents, with this request right now, would have to come out of their pocket $100 or less, depending on the number of advanced placement courses or dual enrollment courses that they take.
No, I understand that. And as a recent graduate of the school district, I know I would not have been able to afford to take any of the tests.
Completely understand.
And I think there are thousands of students in this school district that might not be able to afford it. And we have a $2 billion budget.
And I also just wanted to clarify for the Head Start/Early Start program that we did reduce 21 positions, those central office positions that were aligned with that federal grant, to help to pay for part of the Early Start program. I didn't want that to go unanswered because we did have people who were in central office positions that we placed in vacancies in schools in order to help cover the cost for that piece. So I just wanted to make sure I clarified.
Yeah, I think the point that I was raising, and I'll end here, was that if we never lost the funds, maybe we could have spent that money to save quality programs that we know that work.
Understood.
Thank you. Finishing the first round, I have Roach, Hernandez, and Boston. So far in round two, I have Williams, Wallace, and Eubanks. Ms. Roach.
Good evening. First, just a couple comments. Just want to say I support the addition of the 4 mentor teachers. As someone who is a struggling first-year teacher myself, once upon a time, I know how difficult that first year of teaching can be, so really support those additional positions. Also want to echo Ms. Grady to support the Navion software, and thank you, Dr. Goldson, for bringing it into the budget, and hopefully we can scale that up to more schools. So a couple of questions. Going back to what Mr. Wallace is asking about, the Office of Continuous Systemic Improvement for Dr. Davis. So just wanted to get more of a sense about what this looks like in schools. So how many staff in this office go to schools regularly, and how often do they go, and what does that look like? And then how are you guys tracking their impact? Are there benchmarks in place to show, what's the value add that they are giving educators in their role?
Thank you for the question. And as I begin responding to the question, I'm going to ask Dr. Reese to also come up to the podium, as he's the Executive Director for the Office of Continuous Systemic Improvement. So they're in schools and or in central office 4 out of the 5 days of the week. There's one day on Mondays where they do hold their staff meetings. Otherwise, their day is packed traveling from school to school or from central office to central office. And thank you. I think I've stalled long enough so that you can continue on with the question, Dr. Reese.
Absolutely. Good evening, and thank you for your question. So the office has 1 executive director, myself, 10 systemic improvement specialists, and then I have 1 assistant. And as Dr. Davis said, we are in schools and central offices most every day. As a matter of fact, we used to have a team meeting every Monday, but now we reduced that to twice a month so that we could actually spend more time in schools. Regarding the value add, the best way I can describe what the value add is to talk about the work that the specialists do on site with school leadership teams, which means the principal, assistant principals, and coaches, and then teacher teams. In short, in helping the system kind of become great by choice, we understand that it's very important that teachers and principals understand the data that we are using to assess progress. So when we have new assessments like MAPR, and we're training on the Reader Access Assessment, PSAT has kind of redesigned itself. My office, in collaboration with others in the system, work on site to help teachers and leadership teams understand what the assessment measures and how we can use that data responsibly, and then we actually use the 8-step data-wise cycle to help teachers and principals understand what the science of improvement looks like through their collaboration.
Thank you. And I guess a question about the value add. So how do you try to track that? Do you do you have the educators fill out surveys to say to what extent this helped us better use data? I mean, how do you, I guess, show that your staff are making progress, helping build capacity for these schools?
All right, so currently, I guess there will be a lot of qualitative measures that we capture in order to see what our impact is. Every time we have a meeting with the staff, we could have a very simple plus delta protocol where teachers and administrators talk about what they learned during the session and how the use of protocols and the process is helping them learn how to collaborate better. We also work with the Office of Talent Development and the Instructional Directors and others in teaching and learning around some of these systemic professional development. We work directly with principals and assistant principals, and there too we get direct qualitative feedback around how the learning that they're receiving is helping them think differently about it.
In addition to
Thank
that,
you.
in addition to that, Dr. Reese, can you briefly explain your integration into the systemic strategic plan and how that is being monitored as well?
Absolutely. So the Embrace Data-Wise strategy is one of the 20-something odd strategy teams. We are one of the 5 that fall underneath the academic excellence umbrella. So we are the one academic excellence team that falls under Dr. Davis. The other 4 fall under Dr. Goldson. And so the data-wise process is a very complex one where you can look at integration of the process on a lot of different metrics. One being, are schools and school teams making it through the cycle to understand how improvement works? And the other way that we look at it is through depth of penetration. Is it just the principal and leadership team that understand the process and how it works, or has it really impacted the entire culture of the school? And do all staff members know and how to use the ACE habits of mind and the 8 steps of the process? So we are tracking what progress looks like, and we're submitting that to Dr. Davis and then the strategy teams so that we can see what depth of penetration looks like over time. And I'd love to talk with you more about the nuances of that.
That sounds great, and any kind of summary of that you can share would be wonderful. You might have put out some kind of summary in the past, but just to see that all together would be great.
Absolutely. Stay tuned because we have a publication in progress right now for you.
There you go.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Second question is around the Office of Talent Development, the proposed budget line for the Arbinger Culture Professional Development Training, which I'm excited about because I know we're focused on cultural responsiveness and customer service. Just a question around how you see that being integrated with our greater plan to improve customer service across the district. Is there a cross-department team working on this for central office and school staff? Just wanting to ensure that these efforts are comprehensive, not fragmented.
I appreciate your question, and as I begin answering that, I'm going to either ask Dr. Shetley or Ms. Hodges, and then I'm sure Mr. Rhodes also can chime in. So they are not going to be separated or disparate entities. Once again, I'm going to ask either Dr. Shetley or Mr. Rhodes to talk about going back to the strategic plan and how both the Arbinger as well as customer service are now an integrated strategy team and the work that they're going to do together.
And I can start. So when you look at the 4 focus areas for the strategic plan, we're part of one of those. We talk about communication, community outreach. And so a major focus is looking at culture and how we all work collectively and collaboratively around customer service and also culture for learning. And so that's how that strategy came to place. And I would say that the work that we're doing with Arbinger is not respectively just talent development. It penetrates all sectors of our workforce. So our partners include trainers, including central services as well as supporting services. So it's not just centralized in talent development. We are partnering with the Arbinger Institute to provide training that covers all of the different facets of the organization. So when we look at training and building capacity and also addressing a culture for learning and customer service, it includes work from across the different offices. And so part of that, the funding that's required for that is not only just for the materials, but looking at how we can get certification for the folks who will be going out and working with the schools and the teachers and the administrators. And also looking at making Arbinger and the work that we do in concert with Strength Finders and the Gallup organization to be a fabric of how we engage our community as we learn from the lesson from the transition report.
Sure, and I'll just add that this on? Maybe not. Is it on? All right. I'll just add that if you remember, well, Mary, you might not remember, Roche, you might not have been on the board last year when the customer service, communications, and culture strategy team did a board presentation, but the customer service piece was really landed in the lap ultimately in the Office of Ombudsman, and they put together a customer service handbook. But to be very frank with you, that customer service handbook really has little weight unless the system embraces a culture that ultimately I believe Arbinger will help us to utilize better. So at the board work session on Thursday, the Ombudsman Office will talk a little bit about the customer service handbook, which was a collaboration of a number of departments and entities across the system thinking about protocols basically on how we as a system should respond to not just the community, but even ourselves as colleagues. But as part of that work, I think it would be a waste of time, energy, and resources if we did not really dive deeper into the motives behind why we answered the phone the way we do. And I can at least say for me, and I think the entire executive team who participated in Arbinger's work, and I believe, if I'm right, Dr. Davis, we have even expanded that work to outside of the school district with other agencies and county government. We should spend our time and energy building a culture of supporting others, and I think that will allow the customer service handbook to actually have some real legs. So we'll talk a little bit about that on Thursday, and then I know that as we unroll the work around Arbinger, the entire board and others will be able to participate in the opportunity.
Thank you. So 2 more quick questions, I think both for Dr. Davis. So for the role of instructional directors, since I'm fairly new to the board again, what year do we put this role in place, and how do we evaluate them? So again, showing how do we build their capacity for schools?
So instructional directors actually started prior to Dr. Maxwell coming on board. So I want to say approximately 8 years total from the beginning till now.
What has shifted in the role, we're doing our best to shift from a managerial piece of compliance and accountability to making sure that we're actually embodying their name of instructional director, and we're using more of a coaching process of assisting principals and leadership teams in increasing their capacity. I had to look at Dr. Golson because as we moved into this particular structure, I actually was not in the district at that time, so that's why I paused. And since Dr. Maxwell coming on board, and thank you to the board, we've also added instructional directors through our work with our partnership through the Wallace Foundation. They have a strand of principal pipeline and principal supervision pipeline, and their recommendation in order for an instructional director to be an effective with principal, there's a certain ratio that should occur. Prior to this new configuration, an instructional director or an associate superintendent could have up to 30 schools that they're supervising. And we just found that that was not effective. So and we appreciate the additional staff that we were able to get, we have been able to decrease the ratio of principal supervisor to schools so that they can be more hands-on and have the opportunity to get into those schools more often in order to be intimate not only with, once again, the principal work, but also the leadership team and the teachers as well.
Great. And do we know with the proposed budget what that ratio would get to next year, approximately?
I'm sorry, we did not ask for any additional personnel next year.
So I guess this year, do you know what the approximate ratio is? You mentioned it was 30 to 1.
It's approximately almost 1 to 15.
Okay. That's much better. And the last question is around textbooks. So one of my colleagues asked an interesting question: how much funding would be required for all of our students to receive textbooks that are less than 10 years old? And the response that came up was it would cost the system $21 million for all of our students to receive textbooks that are less than 10 years old. So that begs the question, how are we thinking about this in an innovative way? I think Dr. Wilson has talked about moving to electronic format. Just how are we trying to address that?
Yes, as stated before, we have a 7-year plan to begin to move those schools that are existing, that already have one-to-one, So every time that we do a textbook adoption, you'll see a decrease in the number of hardbound textbooks that we're purchasing, but we still have to make purchase of online. And so what many of those vendors are now doing are charging for the same cost for online resources as they are for hardback bound. So I know we think there might be a reduction in cost, but unfortunately, over time, they have now become savvy enough to know to charge the same amount. But we do have a plan, a 7-year plan. This upcoming school year, we will tackle those 10 schools that are currently that we've selected 10, they're more than 10, but we've selected 10 that will do one-to-one, and we will make sure that we provide support so that they use those online resources for far more than they would use a hardbound textbook. And each year, we'll continue to increase the number of schools.
And I imagine part of it is also just trying to communicate to teachers, don't limit yourselves to what's in the textbook, especially if it's over 10 years old. Make sure that you're updating the curriculum. So it's whether that's the instructional directors or the principals that can reinforce that.
I do just want to add that we do have a process where we make sure that we do update textbooks in less than 10-year time frame. And then we do rotate by content area, and so we have a chart. If you'd like to have that, we can send that to you so you can see what year specific content areas are going to be reviewed for adoption.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I appreciate I just wanted to mention having this meeting out in the community today, especially in District 3. So thank you, everybody, for coming all the way up from Upper Marlboro. I do that drive every day, so. And thank you again for the work that you put into this budget on and off the clock. It's certainly appreciated. Actually, a lot of my questions have been answered while I was waiting to get to me. The only one that didn't go answered, and perhaps it's more of a broad brush question, is I know that the Workforce Diversity Task Force has been meeting. While I don't think I've seen the recommendations as of yet, I do want to see if you've given any thought as far as implementing, or if you anticipate to implement any of the recommendations in this budget.
Thank you so much for that question, and thank you for your participation on that particular committee. Right now, the committee is busily putting together all of your work over the last 4 months and writing a report for presentation to both the executive cabinet and to the board. What's interesting is that while we were anxious about the process, some of those next steps have already been put into place. So for instance, the suggestion about recruitment, especially around some of our universities that have high diversity candidates, we already made contact with a lot of those universities and have put them into the recruitment schedule. So little things, we didn't wait for the implementation before the complete compilation.
I won't hold that against you.
Okay, thank you. So we were anxious to do some, but we're going to try to be patient for the actual report to see what other ones we will be able to implement.
So I have myself in the queue. Like Ms. Hernandez, a lot of my questions that I've made notes have already been answered. But one question that I have, first I really want to thank you for all the hard work and the time that I know coming out 3 times. So, next 2 or 3 weeks has been very difficult, but I'm glad that you're here and participating to answer our questions. I'm curious about our athletic trainer, although I'm very glad that we have added that to the budget this year, because having 2 granddaughters who can assist the athletes and how important having those trainers there for our athletes. But the question that I have, I noticed that it's a contracted-like service that we're looking at. And I was just wondering, have we looked at partnership with our Prince George's County Fire and EMS program to provide those services, or are we actually going out to get actually bid contractors outside of our district And also, will this, although it's a contracted, will it be added to the athletic budget, or will it be coming out of our student-based, individual high school students' budget?
Thank you for that question, and Dr. McGuire is also coming up. I might have to get back with you with more information about the first one. We currently do utilize and partner with the EMS. However, depending on the availability, we don't always have what we need at games by partnering with the EMS. As far as the budget, it is going to be a part of the athletic budget, and it will not be part of student-based budgeting or impact that in any manner.
Or their individual school athletic budget. It's separate.
Also, we are looking to partner with MedStar to secure the athletic trainers for the district.
Thank you. I think we are at round 2. I don't see any new pads. So we're round 2. So the first one on cue for round 2 is Dr. Anderson.
Thank you, Ms. Barsett. And I want to repeat what my colleagues have said. We appreciate the work that you do, but our work is to represent the community and be the voice of the community. And we have some strong feelings about some items, too. Not in a contentious manner, but in a manner to let you know that we're serious about those items. I'm still not clear on the supplement to titles, to the title money, school improvement money, and teacher enhancement money. Did I understand you to say that in addition to the federal funds, that those federal funds are supplemented by other funds? Okay, all right, okay. Now let's see. I guess we could start off with how much does the federal government give us for school improvement Part A?
As Mr. Pfister, looks for that information, I'm also going to ask either Dr. Mahone or somebody from her team in order to come up, because I believe that Dr. Anderson is specifically asking about the priority schools in which have been identified by the state and how much federal funding we're getting from.
Well, I'm not just talking about those. I think the federal funds are given across the schools, right? According to the performance of students and the needs of teachers?
Not necessarily. So let's talk, I guess let's talk about all of the different federal funds, and hopefully we'll answer.
How much are we getting in federal funds for title? Well, let's start off with school improvement, and then for Title II.
I can begin to address the funding for priority schools, which is oftentimes exchangeable right now for formerly what was known as schools that are in improvement. We have priority schools that receive a certain percentage of the Title I allocation to provide additional resources and materials for their students based on their needs. And as has been referenced earlier tonight, there are currently 2 priority schools in Prince George's County, and standing next to me is my senior budget analyst. She can give you the exact numbers. I wouldn't want to give any alternative facts about that.
I need clarity on the piece, please. I just need clarity on the piece. Now, when we do school-based budgeting, and we come to a school, we've got the Davis School. We got the Davis School, and in that school, I have 20 kids who are ELL learners, and I've got 50 kids who are da-da-da-da-da. Do those schools get funding based upon the characteristics of those students?
They get funding based on some of the characteristics of the students.
What are the some?
So the some are for students that are below grade level.
Below grade level.
Or low performing in elementary and K-8 based on either the KRA, please excuse me, or the SRI / previously we used the SRI, now we'll be using MAP-R. And then for our high school students, our at-risk high school students, based on our early warning indicator.
Okay, that's okay. I just want to get that part. So we go to low-performing schools that have low-performing schools according to the criteria that you discussed.
And then in N, as well as ELL students.
As well as ELL students. So the schools do get funds based upon the characteristics of some of their students. Is that true?
For student-based budgeting.
For
But
school-based,
then
I think I started off with for school-based budget, like I'm sorry.
But
Student-based
then there's
budget.
another characteristic. There could be a characteristic of a student with special needs. That is not embedded.
Okay, I just want to, my time is running out and I want to get my question in. So now, are there specific limitations on how that money should be used? You know, for the students?
We would have to adhere to whatever specifications we outlined in that federal grant, so yeah.
Because that's why I'm trying to get to. We have these 25, 30 lowest performing schools, and they seem to recur every year, the same schools, and they're getting these federal dollars plus supplemental dollars, I would think, because they're there. And we don't seem to have benchmarks or a target to where they ought to be in X number of years. That's a little concern that I have. I mean, it's a big concern. I mentioned it before because, it may not just be the teachers. It could be the curriculum. It could be the previous thing. It could be so much. And I'm wondering, how are we really studying this piece so that we can get better performance? My time is running out, so I can't answer all my questions. I am concerned, though, about the children who may not get an opportunity to go to the middle colleges, because we're going to have more than one, and who may not get to be involved in advanced placement because of financial reasons. And so I would hate that we would move towards a system that discriminates, not intentionally, but discriminates based on financial status. That's not what public education should be about. So I'm wanting us to figure out what can we do, if it's the establishment of a special fund, if it's something that we can, the part of which we could handle under the board with a recommendation from the administration, so that we don't have students saying, I won't take that advanced placement test because I can't pay for it, or I won't go to the middle college, although I'm smart enough, but I can't buy the textbooks. And it's just not fair. I don't even want to say equitable. It's discriminating, but we don't intend to, but we are doing it. And so I want us to think about what we can do, and I would be happy to work with you on that.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson.
Let me just...
And Dr. Segun, I know we didn't answer her question, but I just want to give her a page number.
Okay.
Page 37, because we didn't answer her question, but it's on page 37.
The list of all the federal
It's also
programs.
It's also in the supplemental section of the budget A7. It gives the same detail
That's
that
right.
Dr. Davis just mentioned. Page 37 gives the numbers. In the supplemental section of the budget document, starting on page A7, it gives the numbers and the detail and description of each
I have
restricted
it right
grant.
here. I mean, this is what I submitted to you today, actually kind of late, but this is what I submitted to you, starting on A7, 8, and 9.
All right.
Yes.
All right.
So,
Thank you.
So that's why I have the concern.
All right. Thank you. So, colleagues, we have Williams, Wallace, Eubanks, Quinteros, Grady, and Burrows, and we have 6 minutes before we're due to have a public session. We started about 15 minutes late, so I'm going to give us a 10 or 15-minute leeway, but I'm going to ask folks to please, I know we got the 3-minute timer, I'm going to ask you, let's try to make it more like a minute or so that we can get through the next round. Ms. Williams.
Thank you. I'm not going to have a question, I'm just going to have a request. Just as we talked about the AP test, and I understand that the dual enrollment now plays a part in our outcome of students being prepared for college and career. Can we get just maybe over the last 3 to 5 years, the spending on AP tests, and then when the dual enrollment came into play, is there a difference in that number? I just want to see what was that effect on student enrollment. The other question, or I guess data question, is when we talk about the reserve for the classroom balancing, and I saw that thank you for your response to the question about the number of schools that use that funding. I saw that it was about 23 or something like that. Is there money left on the table? Have we not used all that money? And if not, could we use it?
No, the schools, when they're requesting those positions, use every available penny that we have.
So 23, this $3 million, almost $4 million, only funded 23 schools out of our 200 and something schools?
Yeah, we can get you the detail follow up on that, but how we posed the question was the number of schools. Mm-hmm. So there are some schools that could have had more than one position, which would add into that, but we can get you follow up. And then there was also probably some discretionary funds in there as well.
Right. I just wanted to sort of look at how that is, how we're using that money, because I think that $4 million, if we use that ratio of 12 teachers per million, it just doesn't seem like we're able to fund enough. So let's just provide that data. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple quick questions. I know I'm crunch time limit. Just want to get some clarification, I guess, a follow-up to Mrs. Williams' request on the AP exams. I know there was some mention earlier, I forgot who mentioned it, about comparison of what other counties in the state of Maryland do. If you all have it right offhand, or if you don't, follow up discussion on which counties in the state or cities in the state of Maryland full out pay for AP exams for all students, which one only pay for students on free reduced meals. And if I understand correctly, when we had the conversation last school year about the AP exams, free and reduced meal students were going to get the exam paid for up front, and students who were not on free and reduced meals, like me when I was in high school, you have to get a 3, 4, or 5, and that cost would still be reimbursed in the school system. Is that still happening? So if that is, in a way, we are paying for all AP exams. Students just have to pass it. And then on student services, I know I'm running out of time, I just wanted to praise the administration on the increase in the FTE for bullying prevention. One of my core personal initiatives. I thank you for that. I'll be fighting for that come reconciliation. And then on student engagement, I know there's a staff stipend for tobacco education prevention classes. Is there any thought of expanding that to marijuana and alcohol for students? And finally, I see the list of the before and after program sites. Just want to get a rundown of the services and the quality of education at those sites. I've been, I guess, a lone wolf on the board of wanting to and advocating for the expansion of school hours for our students, particularly our priority schools and low-performing schools, and also the thought of expanding those before and after care sites to middle schools as well. I yield back.
You were going to clarify actually about his question about the AP exam?
Thanks. Actually, we are the only jurisdiction in the state of Maryland that pays for the advanced placement exam. I know that off the top of my head. Now, if there are any LEAs that pay for free and reduced meals, I'm not sure, so I wrote myself a note to make sure I get that information to you.
And to be clear, what he asked about, you know, the idea that if you pass, we'll pay, that's not in the budget. There's nothing in the budget for AP, correct? Okay.
There is nothing.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm next. Speaking of AP, I just I want to just join the discussion briefly, saying I've asked Ms. Boston, I think this would be a great discussion for us to have at the next budget hearing. I would argue that actually it's not, you know, when you really think about it, it's not great, not necessarily good education policy to pay for everybody to take the exam, because there's a whole lot to that. But I would love to have a discussion and maybe even engage some students about ways in which we can really improve, give the support that students need to really significantly increase the AP exam and see what we can do with it. So hopefully you guys come to the next budget meeting on the 16th, right? Yes. The only other thing, a question for data later on. Mr. Burrows quoted class size numbers, and he got that from a very reputable source of the Wade, Washington area boards of education when he compared like 2013 to now. I'd like to see what our data says about that difference and a little bit more explanation, because the difference that he cited was pretty significant over time. And so if we have our own data, maybe it aligns to Wade, maybe it doesn't. I'd like to see what our data says and then get a little explanation. Maybe if we can just put that in as the next written follow-up, I'd appreciate that. All right. Ms. Quinteros-Grady.
Just wanted to, I think just want something to be considered. I asked a question regarding the summer initiatives, and you all shared the criteria, but I would want something else to be considered, and that's the summer bridge programs. I think, we talk a lot about trying to get our young people ready, our students, and a lot of data shows around that transition from elementary to middle, second functioning skills, and being able to offer, with that criteria in mind, some of the students that may be struggling or are actually given that option, I think could help us be really successful in that transition to middle school, and vice versa. And also that transition from middle school to high school. But just wanted to, because that's the reason why I asked, because I didn't see that, and I was a little surprised that, I know that you have your reasons as to why you're targeting. And the other piece, just some of the feedback I received when we've done the summer guide, it's been the access to it. So making sure if there's something that's right in the north, the central, the south, so that there's access to the students that want to participate. And that's just some feedback that I've received a lot regarding these programs. The last thing, and then I guess I don't even think we'll have time, but I know that I'd asked a question about the special education budget and some positions, and I understand that they were included in the resource budget. And just my question was around our students' caseload regarding special education, if, if we have the appropriate caseload management, the staff in place to adequately respond to those needs.
Are you saying you asked that in your written questions?
No, this is regarding, just as a follow-up to, I noticed that there was, I asked around the audiologist, and it was saying that, because I asked why was that eliminated? Yeah.
Thank you. Just
and
make
then
sure.
I built on it. Okay.
All right, thank you. Mr. Burrows.
Just to clarify, freeze my time. Oh, no. I need to go back up to my full time.
Yes,
right. Football game. Right. Just to confirm, we're also not paying for AP tests for our farm students. Is that right? Nobody at all? Okay.
For FY-18, no one. Right
Okay.
now, yes, everyone.
Okay. But so I guess my question, well, before I go there, let me go here. There were talks about instructional directors. I can tell you that the instructional directors that I work with or that work with my district do a phenomenal job. And they know the data, they coach principals very effectively. So I want to thank the instructional directors and also the Office of Talent Development with PEEP and everything that they do. Those are very high-functioning groups of employees. How much money do we currently have in the budget for AP tests?
For this year?
Yeah.
I don't know, I'd have to get back to you, but I would say approximately 800,000.
Okay.
Would cover this year, it covers this year's cost.
Okay, so I guess my question is, I guess for the superintendent, Dr. Maxwell, 800,000 out of a $2 billion budget does not seem like it's a lot if we truly value this. And if we're not going to cover poor kids, students that we know don't have access to the resources, their participation will go down. and that might not impact affluent kids in the same way. So what is your philosophy around equity in this, and how did you arrive to this decision? Of all the things you could cut, why this, and why have it impact our poorest kids? I'm confused.
So I would only say that this is a collaborative, participatory conversation that we go through. This was not something that I sat somewhere and made an edict that said we must do that. Everybody that you know on the executive team has budgets that they have to balance, and they have to make some tough decisions. We are not being funded to do everything that we would like to do. And so, we see it as how do we make the school system work, and how do we balance all of our individual budgets as well as the large budget. When this conversation came up in the fall, it was a question about, well, people have already registered, they wouldn't have done that. And so at that time we said, we'll reinstate it for the year, and then we will come back and discuss it when people have plenty of time to understand the outcome, and that's where we are today.
Well, I guess I'm specifically trying to understand your philosophy or your thinking around poor kids not being able to pay for this test, therefore they're less likely to take it, versus affluent kids who have the money being able to afford it. There's going to be a disparity in test takers, and I want to know your philosophy as a superintendent around equity as it relates to that.
I think equity is a very complicated conversation that we strive to meet every day and try to level as much of it as we can. But I would again say to you that it isn't just AP or not AP. There are other trade-offs that we make when we balance, when we adopt a whole budget and when we balance a budget. It isn't just one thing or another. It's getting to the bottom line.
Are we asking for an additional $124 million from the county council?
Okay, so
are we?
Of course, you know the budget numbers. So what's
That was a yes or no. Yes or no. Are we asking for an additional $124 million from the county council and county government?
You can ask that question because you got the numbers right in front of you.
I mean, just for the public, because I know we are. I think it's important that the public knows that we are.
So make that in a statement. But anyway, this is our budget. This is our budget hearing. We're going to have a robust budget debate. We're going to start. I already asked to put this topic on our budget committee hearing, so we will be able to talk about this. No one is dismissing that. And we have about 5 more minutes, and I have Roach, Ahmed, and Blocker.
Great, thank you. This question goes back to instructional directors and the Office of Continuous Systemic Improvement. So just hearing the responses around how we're trying to shift the responsibilities of instructional directors to be more of a coaching role, if you could just clarify then what is the difference between the responsibilities of instructional directors as you see it and staff in the Office of Continuous Systemic Improvement in terms of coaching the school site leadership teams?
One of the main differences, and I hate to be so direct, it's about who the boss is and who is not the boss, who does the evaluation and who does not do the evaluation. So that's the most direct way that I can delineate the two jobs. The instructional director is not only the coach, but they're also the supervisor, which means they do the evaluation. They determine whether or not this particular individual in our school system is meeting the criteria in order to be leading one of our great schools. In addition to that, the Office of Continuous Systemic Improvement, they have a specialized expertise. While instructional directors may understand a little bit of the data-wise process and be able to help schools, that is really the expertise of the Office of Continuous Systemic Improvement. So the range of responsibilities of an instructional director, not only to coach and build capacity, to evaluate, to assist with parent concerns, to come out when there are PTA issues and things like that, is way greater than the responsibilities of an Office of Continuous Systemic Improvement specialist.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I would just then ask, did these two positions coordinate with each other to make sure the principal isn't overwhelmed by their support?
I appreciate that question. Oftentimes when you are in a school, you'll see the ID, and I'm going to use acronyms because it's way too long to keep saying Office of Continuous Systemic Improvement. You'll see the OCSI specialist and the ID side by side. Usually also you'll find that they're speaking, if not daily, then weekly, to piggyback on each other's work. So the ID may call the OCSI specialist and say, listen, this is what I was working with the instructional team. They got into a stuck point on this particular data point. Can you then do some professional development in helping them to understand their MAP-R data? So absolutely correctly that we are doing our best to not overwhelm schools with central office pouncing on schools in the name of saying that we're trying to be helpful.
Thank you. Ms. Ahmed.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? All right. One quick question for you. So a couple of days ago, we had some amazing news come out about graduation increase for our students. And I was wondering, what are some of the factors that you all believe have caused this increase, and what's in our budget to make sure that we achieve that level of student success moving forward?
So there are a number of key things that have gone into that. I mean, you've already heard this evening about the data-wise process. We also, in the first year our team was together, we made sure that each of our high schools had the capacity to offer the online credit recovery programs that only some of our schools had when we first arrived, and we developed through the Continuous Improvement Office, data-wise, and we developed an early warning system where we run metrics on students that are going to be in need of interventions based on certain metrics that we have, and we provide those early warning system lists to schools so that half of their work is already done. They know, that Kevin is going to need some sort of interventions, and they can go to right to work on that without having to wait. And then we've been relentlessly tracking that data.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Blocker, you got a last question for the evening.
Do I need to use the mic?
Yes, please, so we're recording.
I'm just going to make this one last statement, and I'm going to be done from there. Rahila, she actually beat me to the punch because I was also going to ask a question about the graduation rates. I've seen it, on Facebook, social media. Our graduation rates are up. We're doing fantastic, which is great, and I'm glad that the graduation rates are up. But in all honesty, I'm a little skeptical. Because just because graduation rates are up doesn't necessarily mean that our students who are graduating out of this school system are actually college and/or career ready. So this goes back to my statement, as well as Mr. Burrell's statement concerning advanced placement. I am looking forward, as the chair mentioned, to having a robust conversation about AP, but I would think that if graduation rates were up, like we're saying that they're up, and our students are college and/or career ready, then what we would do is, instead of cutting a program again like AP that helps continue to make sure our graduation rate increases, for us to cut a program that is quote unquote going to contribute to increasing graduation rates, then it just really doesn't make sense for us to cut advanced placement. And I'll end by saying that, I'm looking forward to having the conversation, but what I will say is that my community, which is 130,000 students, will stand strong. We stood strong together when the decision was made to cut advanced placement without notifying parents. And if I need to, we will continue to stand strong. If we don't have an agenda line or item that mentions that we will continue to cover the cost of advanced placement for all students in Prince George's County, I'm speaking on behalf of 130,000 students. We stand strong. We will not back down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blocker. Just as we conclude, for clarity, we're talking about cutting the fee for the test, not cutting advanced placement, just to make clear that folks are here. Advanced, so not that that's not significant, but just for clarity. Just for clarity, yep. All right, thank you for that robust discussion. We will adjourn our work session.